And welcome everybody to another edition of the GSMC Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. As always, I'm your host, Kenneth Grunfelder, and it's great to have you guys here on this Tuesday, February 11th. We have a lot to cover on the show today. Before I get into all that, just want to remind you guys to tip or donate and get your comments recognized. Make sure to hit that super chat button in the chat if you want to see me acknowledge any thought or comment you may have throughout the live broadcast. Makes the show more lively, more entertaining. Between myself, the host, and you guys, the viewers, we appreciate your guys' viewership each and every day. So any contribution you can make to the show means the world to us as we put out content for you guys each and every day. And also the other way to help out the show is by going to the link at the bottom of the show segment on the ticker, GSMCPodcast.net. That is GSMCPodcast.net. So let's get into what we are going to discuss for today. So we are going to start off the show. We are going to talk about Aaron Rodgers, and it looks like he will definitely not be coming back to the Jets. He met with the Jets, and the Jets told him that they are planning on moving on, according to Fox's Jay Glazer. We were told that on the Super Bowl, so we'll talk about that. I'll give you my thoughts. We'll also get into talking about, and as you saw me talk about the tips, you saw the Patrick Mahomes graphic, so we'll talk about in the second part of the show how the Super Bowl the other night affects his legacy going forward. We'll get into talking about the Steelers and Russell Wilson, their parting ways, it seems. Jay Glazer also brought that up during Media Week. And then we'll talk about Kellen Moore likely taking the Saints job. And then in the final part of the show, we'll get into talking about Deebo Samuel. He requested a trade, and we'll talk about that as well. So let's get into the first topic, which is talking about Aaron Rodgers. So if you recall, Aaron Glenn brought up Aaron Rodgers at his introductory press conference and said that Aaron Rodgers will be talked about. They said they were in communication with Aaron Rodgers, and they did meet with him. Aaron Rodgers flew out from his home in California to meet with the Jets, and it seems like, according to reports, that the most likely scenario here is that they're going to move away from Aaron Rodgers, and he's going to be playing elsewhere next year if he decides to play. Now, I have some mixed emotions with it. On one hand, it could be looked at as a mistake because if the Jets want to win now, I think Aaron Rodgers is their best option. I don't think that the quarterbacks that are available out there, at least free agents, because also Matthew Stafford could be traded, and I don't think the Jets are going to do that. I think when you look at the quarterbacks that are free agents, I think he is the best option. I think he showed you towards the end of the year that he could still play, and he would be another year removed from the Achilles injury. Now, obviously, he's in his 40s now, and he could get hurt again. But I do think Aaron Rodgers showed you enough towards the end of the year. And had the Jets, maybe had better coaching, and the coaching situation wasn't a mess, maybe this team would have been a little bit better record-wise instead of 5-12. Now, I'm not saying that, Aaron Rodgers is excused from his level of play last year now, because he wasn't great at times. I get it. But I do think that he did show you something. Now, you could fall into the trap of, oh, wow, he looked great towards the end of the year. Let's bring him back. And then he ends up not playing well again. But who knows? I don't know what the Jets' plan is at quarterback now, because now Tyrod Taylor is your option. And you have Jordan Travis on the roster too, but he didn't practice at all. So, I mean, if the Jets are going into the season, now if they go out and they sign Justin Fields, okay. But if they just go into the season next year with Tyrod Taylor as their quarterback, I mean, why couldn't you just bring back Rodgers then? But from some of the things I was listening to yesterday, if the Jets brought Rodgers in to meet with him and say, listen, we think it's best if we part ways. And they just felt like, look, Aaron Rodgers comes with a lot. We've seen that since he's come over to the Jets and even, towards the end of his Packers career with some of the things that went on. If they just felt like we want a fresh start and we think it's best if we part ways, okay. But, if you're just moving off of him just to move off of him and you're just going with Tyrod Taylor next year, I mean, I just don't agree with that. If you don't want Aaron Rodgers back because you just feel like the relationship wouldn't mesh, that's one thing. But if you're just not bringing him back because you just don't want to bring him back, and Tyrod Taylor is going to be your starter. I mean, it's not a guarantee that Tyrod's going to be the starter. But if you're just moving off of him just to move off of him, and you have no valid reason for it, then what are we doing? But hopefully we get some clarity on that as to why they said we're good. Now, does Aaron Rodgers want to continue playing? Well, the fact that he flew out to meet with the Jets does show you to an extent that, yeah, maybe he still wants to play. Because if he was not really that into the idea of playing next year, then maybe he doesn't fly out. But he did. So where could he play next year if he does want to play? Now, we had this discussion yesterday in our production meeting. The Steelers came up, the Raiders, the Titans, even the 49ers have come up. I also would throw the Giants in as well. I feel like for me, and we'll talk about Russell Wilson later in the show, I think of the teams that are looking for a quarterback, I would say the Steelers. I would say the Steelers. Because there's a relationship with when talking about Mike Tomlin and Aaron Rodgers. And it doesn't seem like the Steelers aren't bringing back Russ. I mean, could they bring back Justin Fields? We'll see. But the Steelers, maybe they continue down that path of, all right, we got to bring in a veteran guy because we have a team that can compete. Now, you go from Russell Wilson, who's in his mid-30s, to now Aaron Rodgers, who's in his 40s. So from that perspective, it's like, does that really make sense? In some cases, no. But maybe the Steelers want to take a chance. The Titans also make sense just because I feel like with the veteran players that they have on offense, Calvin Ridley they brought in, and they signed Tyler Boyd in the offseason. They signed Tony Pollard. They did not get great quarterback play in 2024 with Will Levis and Mason Rudolph. They are picking in the top 3. So could they take a Shedeur Sanders, a Cam Ward? I mean, you hear that, they might not pass up on a generational talent. So could they take Travis Hunter? And the other thing, too, is it doesn't seem like Devontae Adams is going to come back either now. So is Devontae Adams going to follow Aaron Rodgers to his next destination if he does continue playing? So there's a lot that's going into this. And we're still waiting. I'm sure we're going to get confirmation on what Rodgers decides to do. And if there's one thing we know about him is that he has always had a chip on his shoulder. And going 5-12 and going out like that, I don't think sits well with him. Now, I always said I think he's going to retire. Now I'm not so sure. I mean, the last time that it was up in the air whether he was going to retire or not, I said he was going to retire, but he did not. So I just don't know. But like I just said, always has a chip on his shoulder, and I don't think he wants to go out like that. And maybe, he waits for an injury to happen and he gets brought in. Who knows? But I think he could still play. He showed that. It's got to be the right situation. It's got to be a team that's got a line that can protect him. They have weapons, have at least a decent running game, right? I mean, you look across the board. I mean, the Steelers, I think, would make the most sense. The problem is the line was not great. But they have a lot of young players on that offensive line that need to continue to develop. You got George Pickens there. You got Pat Freiermuth there. I don't know what they're going to do with Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris. But listen, if that line can improve and you bring over Devontae Adams and you got him to pair with George Pickens and a good defense, that could work. It's just you're playing in the same division now as Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow. The Raiders, I mean, the AFC West is a gauntlet. The Raiders got some ways to go before they can be competitive in that division. The Titans, I mean, if you want to go to the weakest division, Titans could be the option because you got the Texans, the Jaguars, they got a new head coach. The Colts were disappointing. It's possible. I did throw in the Giants, but, we got the Super Bowl champs there. You got the Commanders who made the championship game, and the Cowboys were disappointing last year, but you figure they're going to be better. Maybe you go to the Vikings. You go back to a familiar division. You let J.J. McCarthy sit another year, and you complete the Brett Favre cycle. Maybe you do that. It would be hilarious if that happens. But I don't think so. But that's kind of my thoughts on the whole Aaron Rodgers situation. Let me know what you guys think, though. Where does he end up if he continues to play? Do you think the Jets made a mistake by letting him go? I know there's definitely Jet fans that are happy about this. There are Jet fans that are indifferent about this. And there are Jet fans that are upset about this. I'm kind of in the middle of I get it. But I also think, well, let's see what they end up doing at the quarterback position. But I know there are Jet fans that are upset because it's like you're letting Rodgers go and now you're really just throwing away another season. And, there's talk of, there was talk of Garrett Wilson wanting out and just, let's just see how this all plays out. And then we'll come back to it. So we're going to take our first break of the show now, and then when we come back, we'll talk about another quarterback who just played in the Super Bowl, Patrick Mahomes. How did this game affect his legacy? We'll talk about that when we come back. So with that being said, stick around, and we'll be right back here on the GSMC Football Podcast.